Welcome to Small Arms Solutions. As we all know, there's been a very big announcement by Colt that they are ceasing production of their AR-15 type rifles or modern sporting rifles to the commercial market. Now, we're going to discuss here is what my personal opinions are. This is all, everything we're going to discuss here is my opinion, going from the history. But in order to talk about this, I think we need to go back a ways and see where a lot of these real issues started with Colt, especially with the 2A community, and what I think the fallout's going to be from this decision. So I think we're going to have to go back in time to 1989. 1989, it was owned by Colt Industries, Colt's firearms division. In 1989, Patrick Purdy went into a Stockton schoolyard with a Chinese AK-47 and shot up the schoolyard, and he killed several children, which was the first time that assault weapons were redefined from what they actually are as semi-automatic only rifles. And there was a big push to ban them. It was a major issue. Well, Colt decided at that time that they would voluntarily withdraw the AR-15 from commercial sales. So only law enforcement military was allowed to buy them. Well, that really upset the commercial market. At that point, Colt lost very many loyal customers who they probably had most of their lives. Colt really started to show its colors that at that time, it was more so not so much for public safety. At that time, they just lost the M16A2 contract to FN. That was 1985 or 86. And I think they were probably trying to get back on the government's good side. In 1991, Colt sold the firearms division, and it now became Colt's manufacturing company. And when Colt's manufacturing company came out, one of the first things that they did was they brought the AR-15 back as the Colt Sporter. Unfortunately, all was not well with that. When they reintroduced the Sporter, they voluntarily modified their rifle, which made it totally separate from the mil spec and from common parts, and it caused a lot of parts incompatibility with a lot of aftermarket parts. For instance, the first thing they did was they removed the bayonet lug. Of course, none of us ever heard of a drive-by bayoneting, but they decided to remove it anyways, which made no sense. But the real issues were they modified the lower receiver, and those modifications were major because they modified the fire controller group to take a larger hammer and trigger pin, which means a special hammer, trigger, and disconnector were used. So if you were to have a match grade trigger from any company, you wanted to put it in your rifle, you could no longer do it. So they totally got rid of all the compatibility with those parts. Then they modified the receiver with a pinned-in auto-sear block. Basically what this auto-sear block did was it if it was to be removed, there would be no way to mount a auto sear in there because so much of the aluminum would have been removed around that location where that auto sear pin would go. Also, you had a hump on top of the auto sear block, so you could not install a full auto bolt carrier. So you had to have a new special bolt carrier. You either had to have a standard semi-auto only, and then they went ahead and they shaved off the entire bottom area of the rear of the carrier on the bottom, so you could not put any kind of a modification on there to make that a full auto bolt carrier because there was an aftermarket part. So all these changes were made. So when they did come back, they were really upsetting people to begin with because of the changes that they had made, which set them apart for every other company that was out there. So I think it was right around this time where Colt paved the way for all these other manufacturers to come out. At this time, around the late 80s to early 90s is when Bushmaster really came out as being a major producer and making complete rifles. Unlike Colt at the time, they were giving people exactly what they wanted. People like myself who served in the 1990s, early 91s, we carried M16A2 rifles. And we wanted an exact M16A2, which is exactly what Bushmaster gave us. The rifle that Colt put out was the AR-15A2 prior to the 1990, when they stopped production. They had the AR-15A2 government model, which was similar, but it wasn't exactly what we wanted. We wanted a exact duplicate of that rifle. And of course now DPMS comes up, and because Colt, first off, they had upset the market. Second of all, they modified the rifles. They were not really interested in selling to civilians at that point. After the 1991 reintroduction of the Colt Sporter series, we had another unfortunate event. We had 9/11. At that point with 9/11, the military, we were now at war on two different fronts in Afghanistan and Iraq. Now, in 1995, the M4 was adopted by the U.S. government as a standard carbine. And there was also a sole source on that. So, because of some mishandling of the technical data, the government either would have been sued by Colt for money, which they would have got, or Colt could have could have, and what they did do was they went along with a sole source for X amount of years. At the time, it was no thought, and nobody could have in their wildest dreams would have thought the M4 would become the next U.S. service rifle. Not for rear echelon, but as a general purpose rifle. So when the global war of terror came on, the M4 became the weapon of choice. And as that war would go on, it would completely replace the M16A2 and A4. Well, at this time, Colt went into production, they were starting to have massive U.S. government contracts. They completely ceased, for the most part, all commercial sales, as well as most LE. It was very difficult for LE to get any kind of rifles as well. Because we had two wars going on, their complete three-shift production was going towards U.S. government sales. Now, nobody in their right mind could fault Colt for that. Their first priority has to be to national defense. Which is exactly what that was. Those guns were going directly to the U.S. military and to its allies. At that time, they were going to the U.S. military solely because of the sole source contract. I can recall being at Colt at that time, around the 2008, 9, and 10, where it was very difficult to get LE rifles. It just was very, very difficult. And it was solely military contracts. They did put out a few of them, on occasion, but that was not with that company. Colt as a company has been built and designed as a massive mass production facility for military-grade weapons, which is exactly what it does, and it does well. However, several other things started to fall by the wayside because of the success, the mountains of money that were coming in, happy investors. Colt, during that time, basically stopped R&D. They were providing the U.S. government with the guns that they wanted. R&D basically sat on their ass, and they were not producing any modified or improved versions of that rifle. They kept it as the U.S. government had it, and that was it. Now, any company who has a product, regardless of who your customer is, you were constantly trying to improve to make the best even better. Was the M4 a finalized design? Could there have been more done? Oh, absolutely. In fact, you look at what Carl Lewis has done with the MRP system and his enhanced bolt carrier group. There's a tremendous amount of things that could be done to improve the M4 carbine. But Colt's attitude was, well, the government's happy, so we're just going to sit in our ass and we're not going to do anything. Only from 2000 to present, that's about what happened. The government basically told law enforcement, it told foreign militaries, hey, if it's good enough for U.S. government, it's good enough for you. Through those years, they had new designs, such as the Marshall rifle and even the 9mm submachine gun, but Colt never wanted anything to compete with their core M4 carbine in law enforcement or military sales. So now we look at the commercial sales. Colt went into production after the ban was put in 1994. They obviously, the Sporter had to go into the match target because now we had to get rid of the thread on the barrel as well. Colt went into production in 1994 of the Match Target series, which was ban compliant. So now we're going to move up to 2004, which was the sunset of the ban. Fortunately for the assault weapon ban, there was a sunset in 2004, September, I believe it was. And at that point, manufacturers were now producing, if you want to call it, pre-ban configurations. You were having telescopic stocks, bayonet lugs, high-capacity magazines. Everything went back to the way that it was before the ban because, quite frankly, that ban showed no change in crime whatsoever. All the studies showed that it showed nothing. Even Obama spent a lot of money on tests, on research on this to find out that the assault weapon ban did nothing for crime. Well, as all these other companies were doing this, Colt had decided to leave the commercial guns the way that they were. They were still selling the ban configurations with no bayonet lug and no flash suppressor or compensator. So what did happen was Colt had certain models that were set for law enforcement. You had the LE6920, which was the LE version of the M4 carbine, which was basically a semi-automatic only M4 carbine with a 16-inch barrel for legality, so it wasn't an SPR. AR-15A2 government carbine. They had the Colt 9mm carbines and the AR-15A3. So what had happened was those guns were sold only to law enforcement distributors. Law enforcement distributors, because now that it was perfectly legal, they had started selling those to the commercial market. Colt was getting massive numbers of orders for the LE6920 and some of those other models. And it sort of worked out well because they were sold to LE distributors, so they were LE guns. They were getting the massive sales, but they could still tell the people in New York that these were LE guns because they were going to LE distributors. So they had massive runs of all these LE guns that were going to commercial sales. The guns were relatively expensive. They were unchanged from how they had been in the past. And those guns would go on some of them to this day that they were produced unchanged. So one of the problems with all that was there was not a new product from 1996, I believe it was the introduction, or 96 or 98 was the introduction of the LE6920 carbine. There was not a new product released until 2009, which was the LE6940. So you had all that time in there where Colt had not produced anything new of any sort, which they proved to. I think that's also proven to be part of this whole process that we see right now, leading up to bankruptcy and to where we are today. So it was a series of bad decisions. So as I previously stated, they had the sole source, and they were it was costing the government around $1,200 for an individual rifle. Now, Colt gouged those prices because they could. The only people that could provide them to the U.S. government was Colt, and the government wanted them, so they didn't really have much of a choice. So, again, we spoke of R&D. No changes. So during the next 2 decades, Colt lost its ability to develop any new products. Colt became just a mass production. That's all that it was. The R&D team was not working with any of the LE sales or anybody else to produce new products. They basically completely sat stagnant. There was very few programs that they did submit to. You did have such as the SCAR program they submitted to. When they did have the offensive individual weapon system, they did send a couple to that as well. But really, they didn't really do too much. There were some programs that were really interesting at the time. You did have the Mars program, which was in the late 90s, early 2000s. That program was a success with what it was designed for. In fact, Israel even was ready to make an order, but Colt decided at the last minute they wouldn't produce it because they did not want to compete with their M4 carbine, even though that it was wanted. And they even refused to sell to the gentleman who was responsible for the concept, which was quite sad as well. So as we can see, with all this lack of innovation, upsetting customers by showing lack of support for the Second Amendment, we can see that now we're starting to have a pattern of them starting to upset the American gun owners, thinking that they are not on their side because they stopped production to the commercial market. And this completely paved the way for all of these new manufacturers to come out. Now, if you figure from when the sunset of the assault weapon ban, you figure that there were dozens, if not more, manufacturers who came out to manufacture. And then you had manufacturers such as LMT and Knights who would go ahead and take these rifles to the next level and build a modernized M4, which addressed several of the concerns the original M4 had. You would have additional calibers coming out in 2004. You had the 6.8 SPC, and of course we had the 6.5 Grendel. If we notice that Colt remained solely with 5.56, not even doing 308. So you had companies like Armalite, Lewis Machine and Tool, who were already way ahead of the game, going to law enforcement sales, military sales, and offering different platforms in all these different calibers, where Colt remained the same. So another milestone was around 2010. General Keyes had stepped down, and it was taken over by a guy named Jerry Dinkle as the CEO, and that was a complete disaster. Misappropriations of money. They were wasting money left and right. You had a company who was laying off people because of the lack of military sales. They were laying people off. This company was getting private jets. They were sponsoring race cars, and you had executives who were getting cars now, which would never been done. When General Keyes ran that company, he drove a used, I believe it was a used Jeep Cherokee. General Keyes did not waste money. General Keyes was really the savior of Colt after that bankruptcy back then. He brought it out with the introduction of the M4. The M4 was a saving grace. But during General Keyes' times, again, we were in time of war, which everything was going towards that production. But as the later 2000s came on, those large contracts are coming to an end. The wars were starting to wind down, and the contracts were lightening up. Now comes June 2015. Colt files bankruptcy. In November of 2018 is when Colt lost the sole source contract on the M4. But the writing was on the wall. Colt at no point had any contingency for what is going to happen when the contracts end. Everything comes to an end. You can live high off the horse, but you have to prepare for that time when it ends. So in that time period between when General Keyes left and when Colt filed bankruptcy, and just after, you had loss of government contracts. You had loss of much commercial. Colt was at one time the main manufacturer of the 1911. Not anymore. In fact, there are many companies who make better 1911s at lower cost than Colt did. So Colt does not have the major market share of the 1911s. They completely eliminated the revolvers in favor of going towards more space for production for military contracts. And the revolvers at that time were Colt's core commercial sales, and that was gone. In fact, that was when the Python was discontinued, which Colt every day from what I knew from the time that I was there, they got calls every day from all over the world wanting to have the Pythons go back. Their main staples was the cowboy guns. You had Uberti out of Italy and other companies who were manufacturing cowboy guns, Ruger, at lower cost, just as good quality. You had the M1911, which Colt was probably one of the lowest suppliers of because there were much better companies out there who were making them at less of a price and giving you a lot more. So then you had the AR-15, which they had not modernized. They had not made any new models. Anything they were putting out, it was just lipstick and rouge, Magpul type grips, Magpul handguards, Centurion rails. They really weren't doing anything to change the rifle. It was just the same thing, different furniture. When Colt lost the contract in November of 2018 to FN, in fact, they lost it twice. The first time it was awarded to Remington, and then Colt protested, and because the price that Remington had did not include Colt's royalty, because Colt still gets a royalty. They're no longer sole source, but they do get a royalty. So then when it came out again, the contract was awarded to FN. And this goes to show you where competitive bidding comes from. Colt was selling these rifles for around $1,200 a piece, and when it all came down to FN got the contract, they were just over $600 a piece. So for the most part, the government can buy now just as good a rifles, two for the price they were paying for one with Colt. So that now they didn't went over too well with the government either. 2011 comes, the XM17 program, because Colt has gotten rid of all of their engineers who knew what they were doing. They had nobody there who could actually design a new pistol. And Colt, for all these years prior to the announcement of the XM17, had no R&D going for new pistols. They were still living in the past. We're bringing back this 1911. We're bringing back that 1911. We're bringing back this revolver. We're bringing back that revolver. Two products that have nothing to do with Colt's future. Colt being a military contractor, they need to be developing weapons that are suitable for military and law enforcement use, which they don't. For as far as pistols were concerned, the M45A1 was a complete flop. This was a still that was made to the Marine Corps out of tradition of the 1911. Now it was in the best interest for the Marines, and they found that very, very quickly. Plus, there was a lot of mechanical issues with those pistols as well. The pistol was actually adopted, even though during testing they had frames and slides break. Colt just could not get through their head that the day of the 1911 is over for any kind of a military law enforcement contract. They would lose out as well on the Mark 23 program because they kept trying to go with their 1911 rather than modernize a whole new pistol like H&K did that was designed to work under the conditions that it was designed. Now, for as far as pistols was concerned, why they can't get this through their heads, I don't understand. What does Colt need to do to make a pistol that will work and sell in the modern military law enforcement market? Very simply, all they would need to do is get the specifications for the XM17 program. It lists all the modern features that the militaries are requiring and design a new handgun after that. Have they done that? No. We're now bringing back more revolvers. So the contracts that they've recently were awarded. This is not going to last forever. According to what I had read, they have contracts going into 2014. Now, it's not just blanket amount of guns. This is how many guns they were awarded. When they're going to be bought is a whole different question, is when they're going to have these contracts. Is there going to be time in between and whatnot? Now, as I previously stated, that Colt made many, many mistakes in getting their products out there. And one of the things that they talk about is the fact that the market is saturated. Now, Colt was and still is a major player in what people want. The problem is Colt's rifles were hard to get, and they made them hard to get. In November 2015, Colt introduced their Colt stocking dealer program, which this proved to be a major disaster to the gun dealers. We have brought somebody in to discuss the dealer program for Colt. Perhaps one of the largest reasons why Colt has had a lack of market share is due to their own doing. In November 2015, Colt had released a Colt stocking dealer program, and this severely limited sales to FFLs. And part of this Colt stocking dealer program, there was 4 main criteria. First was retail establishments had to have a storefront and have regular hours open to the public. They also must have 4 Colt handguns from an approved list in inventory, or they must be on order. And also the dealer must possess 1 Colt rifle or have one on order. And what this did was it severely hit the small dealers who did not have the money to invest. Now, rather than me trying to explain this, I have Brandon here from the gun room here in Shenandoah, Texas, who is one of those small dealers who's been around for quite some time, and he has had experience with this Colt dealers program. And I think rather than me tell you how it affected those dealers, it's better to have one tell you. So, Brandon, what can you tell us about when you first heard of this dealer program? And prior to that, did you sell Colts?
Yes, I did. So I've been in business since 2014, and we would often get customers that wanted Colt just based on their name, brand loyalty, and I could order pretty much any Colt
just for your regular distributors.
Through the regular distribution channels. Any of the large distributors would carry whatever. I can get their 1911s or any of their AR platform rifles.
So then comes November 2015.
Yep, I got an email from one of my distributors that said that Colt is starting this exclusive stocking dealer program. It seemed strange because they were filing bankruptcy at the time, which didn't
Colt logic
didn't quite mesh with me. But what it did was it cut the legs out of any small dealer. I now couldn't sell any Colt products. So unless I was to buy it on a secondary market for one of my clients that was looking for it, I couldn't get Colts.
How much would you have to put up to be able to?
Their requirement initially was 10 guns out of their.
So that's an easy $8 to $10,000.
Exactly, and
that you have to put up as a non-stocking dealer.
Sure, I only carry maybe 30 to 40 firearms in my shop to begin with, so they're wanting a full 25% of my inventory to go to a brand that really is tailored more towards the collectors and the people that want just the Colt name.
Would you agree that many of the gun shops in the Houston area are not what you would call as stocking dealers? People would come in, they would order what they wanted because they don't have the capital to.
Yeah. The firearms business. I mean, it's capital intensive. You're putting up, all the money to have these guns in inventory, and it's on you to move them to the customers.
And so you could have money tied up that you just don't have.
Sure. And, all things being equal, if I make the same amount of money on another brand of firearm that customers want or more customers want, I'm going to stock that firearm.
So when customers come and say you want Colts, you basically have to say to them, I can't get them, which then makes you push other manufacturers.
Yep. I'm going to push a substitute. I'm going to push competition because, especially with the 1911 products, there's other companies out there that have a much more diverse feature set and an advanced feature set for the same or lower price.
So in essence, a company that's in bankruptcy or filed bankruptcy is making it difficult for customers to get guns.
Yeah.
You think that could have any kind of an effect on their low sales? Because
absolutely. You would figure that if you were in financial straits as a manufacturer of any product, you would want to get your product into the hand of any buyer that wants to purchase your product either, as an end user or as a retailer to sell to a customer.
This is basically trying just to rope anybody into buying a larger quantity immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than...
Yep. And they said that they wanted to make their name more exclusive. They wanted to play off of their name. Really, that's their only...
That's all they have.
That was their only trick that they had left.
Tell me a little bit what happened in June of 2017.
In June of 2017, I got an email from my distributors saying that Colt was having this Try Colt program. That was a summer special from June through September. In the firearms world, those are the 3 slowest months of the year, June, July, and August. So from June 1st through August 31st, we were allowed to buy Colts, even though we weren't a stocking dealer.
So they were just basically throwing you a bone, saying, here,
mm-hmm.
you guys can do this. It's just this time.
So yeah, and that's the impression that I got was that Colt was having trouble moving their own products, so they were going to give us the permission to buy their stuff, even though...
That's really is a Colt attitude. I can tell you when I was there, we would have customers, foreign customers, who would make requests, okay, we want this type of a firearm. And Colt always had the attitude that, it wasn't we're lucky to have the customer's lucky to have us.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, the Greek army wanted to buy more than the only military ever buy the enhanced rifles, the safe semi-auto burst rifles. They had bought a good number of them, then they wanted to buy more, and they were just told no. So you have a military customer who wants to buy. No, it's the same attitude. Whether it's good enough for the U.S. government, it's good enough for you. So I think these are major things that have come into play where Colt is today. They did not move the rifles because they cut the legs off of people who would be moving them. These small shops who are ordering specifically for customers what they want, rather than stocking cases of these things at a time. As somebody who's in the business right now, do you believe that Colt's future is going to be in making revolvers in 1911? That's going to sustain them after these contracts will eventually go again?
No, the snake guns that they're coming out with now, they're not made by the same people or in the same manner
no, they're not.
As the original snake guns. So the customer's going to know the difference.
Well, I can tell you firsthand that the last person who was on the Python production line, his name was Little John. He was this little French guy. He was an awesome little guy. He was the last person left out of the entire program for the Pythons back in those days, and he retired several years ago. So they have nobody left who was on that same production line. The craft of that hand art. I mean, Pythons. We'll just say it's art.
Absolutely,
that is art, mechanical art.
Yeah, the Python it feels different than any other revolver. Just in the manner of its smoothness and the way it was crafted back then, you could tell it was cared for quite a bit when they made it. And you get something now. It's CNC machined. It's basically push button. They can do all the cutting, all that sort of stuff. It doesn't seem like it has the hand care that they used to have.
Look at the last century. Again, we have three major weapons that Colt started. They started the Model P, which was the cowboy guns. They were the beginning of that. 1911 and the AR-15. All three markets, they're virtually insignificant in all three of them now.
Right. Yeah. You can't get your hands on a Colt single action army from the shop anymore.
And for what the cost is, you could go buy one of the Vaqueros or something else.
Sure. And you could buy two or three of them.
Yeah. Based off of the contract, they're saying they could go into 2024. What's going to happen when that ends? Colt is not going to survive off of revolvers in 1911s. They are designed specifically for military contracts, large volume. So we don't have a handgun that is currently available that will meet any current standards. There is no 9mm high-capacity handgun, as I previously stated. If Colt wants a blueprint, you take the XM17 and you look at all the requirements that were requested by a modern military. That's how you build your gun. That's the only way they're going to survive with handguns, is to make a pistol that they can sell to the foreign market, foreign military, U.S. law enforcement. They don't have it. That was a General Keyes thing. When General Keyes came in, he had said that while he's there, they will not make a 9mm pistol, and that was it. The Colt 2000 was the last one before he came in, and that was a flop, which we're going to be doing a video on as well. Without having that kind of a contingency plan, I don't see anything else other than disaster in the future.
It's unfortunate. I mean, the brand's going to persist. It's one of the oldest American brands. It's just in what form are we going to see it?
That's true. We're going to see somebody just buying the name when they go file bankruptcy eventually.
Yeah, if you look at like Winchester and things like that, they're not making firearms anymore. They are a name, and most of the rifles are made in Morocco, Japan now.
Well, the rifles that you sell, I think they are correct in saying the AR market is saturated. There's no question with that.
Sure.
However, I think Colt stood out because of the name.
Yes.
They were the most sought after because of their name, not because of what they were, because they were better guns. So there is no reason that there should ever have been any kind of a halt or they should have any issue selling any of these guns.
No, and you wouldn't imagine their production costs are any different than any other AR
probably even less because of the fact now that, considering what Colt's cost would be,
right,
without using a union and having parts all farmed out, that cost has got to drastically be lower.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also something else that upset people as well. So there's no reason that Colt should have ever had any issue for as far as selling these guns is concerned. Because of that name, that was what, somebody saw a Colt next to anything else, that's what they're going to buy. So I do believe that their marketing assessment is fully flawed.
Absolutely.
It makes absolutely no sense. And trying to put their future into the 1911s, these people keep living in the past.
Yep.
And as we say, there is no future in the past. And the only way they will survive is to modernize and to get back to being that manufacturing and design mecca that they once were.
Exactly. You've got to compete with the modern products that are out there. Even if it's on the AR platform, you've got to, sell rifles that come with other things than just a 2-piece handguard as a base setup and charging $1,100 for it. That's just not going to cut it these days.
Well, thank you for giving us. It's much better to have you describe what you saw as a dealer than me trying to describe it, because you've seen it all up front.
Absolutely, happy to share my experience. It would be nice if Colt would open up to the smaller dealers, because there are customers that want their product.
Oh, I think they would drastically sell more guns.
Absolutely.
It's literally shooting themselves in the foot again with just bad decision making. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, as everybody knows, on September 20th of this year, Colt made the announcement they will stop sales of the commercial rifles. Now, this was based off of what they're saying. They had a new contract, which is for $41.9 million for foreign military sales. Now, foreign military sales is not the U.S. government. These guns are not going to the U.S. military. They're going to basically our allies as foreign military sales. The confusion that I have through this is whether this is a permanent stop or it's temporary. Because first off, if this was temporary, this was handled completely wrong. If Colt was smart and this was handled in this, they were just going to be doing this temporarily, they would have said that due to large contracts at this point, we're not going to be able to provide to the commercial and LE markets at this time, but we will resume as soon as this contract is done. That sounds much better than saying that we are completely stopping production and then giving some completely ridiculous reason that the market wants this. The market wants revolvers in 1911s. Because whoever did the marketing research for Colt, their data is seriously, seriously flawed. There is far more demand right now for Colt rifles than there ever was for 1911s and revolvers, in my opinion. Colt was manufacturing those. Are they saturated? Market saturated? Yes, the market is saturated. However, everybody wanted a Colt, and it had nothing to do with Colt quality. It had to do with the name. People saw a Colt rifle sitting next to a BCM or an Armalite or anything else, they would buy that Colt because they know that Colt name. What's hurt Colt in the past, first, is what we recently discussed, the dealer program. Second of all was the outsourcing of parts. With the loss of the government contracts, the parts weren't even being made by Colt anymore. It became basically a assembly house rather than a manufacturing firm. And they're not providing the models that the people wanted. So they could have avoided all this sting here and upsetting the Second Amendment groups by just saying this is a temporary thing. We're not ceasing production. We're just going to be halting just until we get caught up with our military contracts. But again, they shot themselves in the foot, as they have for the last 20 years when it comes to this. They have lost now, in my opinion, a significant amount of people who will never buy Colt products again. This is twice within a little over 20 years that Colt has stopped production voluntarily to the commercial market. And doing it at this time where we have a Democratic candidate who's saying right out that he will take AR-15s and AK-47s, he will confiscate them.
Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47.
At the same time you have a presidential candidate saying that, you are now going to stop sales to the American people. That was not a smart move, by no means. So let's talk a little bit about what my thoughts are. How did it get to this point? Well, first, with the announcement of the cessation of rifle production, that was completely, fundamentally flawed marketing research. Who knows where they got that information from? You look at anybody out there. Colt has always been the preference, even though they are not the best anymore. They're pretty much old technology compared to newer rifles that are coming out. They were still the most in-demand rifles, but through their own issues of outsourcing components, overpricing retro rifles, the lack of sales was due to the stock and dealer program, I believe. Of course, they outsourced components, passing them off as their own. The retro rifle that they had, which was a beautiful rifle, but they outrageously priced it so nobody could even afford it, and it was not worth it. Lack of refinements to their weapon systems. Not giving customers what they want. They've been very clear of what types of rifles that they want. They want newer and updated rifles. Pimping out their name. The Colt competition was a complete joke. You had DPMS rifles for 308s. When Colt had their own LE 901 platform, they could have used their own uppers and lowers. So that was stupidity as well. The Expanse was a complete cluster. Having a complete rifle that you're marketing as your own that's made by somebody else. Colts are still the most sought after, and they will be. They've just basically now increased the prices. Now Colts are becoming collector's items. I believe wholeheartedly that over the last 20 years, Colt has had entirely incompetent marketing and sales. They brought a lot of people in who did not belong there. They bring in people because they were retired general officers, and these people did not know anything about business, and they cost Colt as well. The company model failed by having no R&D. Colt at one time was the mecca of small arms development. That was probably in the 80s and in the early 90s. You had so much new product coming out. You were having state-of-the-art equipment, and it all just stopped after the global war on terror. When those big checks started coming in for all those guns, it just ceased. And nobody was on engineering to do anything either. They were just sucking off the government tit and not producing new product or improving their product. Colt has lost the 1911. They were, again, one time everybody wanted the Colt 1911. They've lost it. You look at Kimber, you look at Smith & Wesson, you look at anybody who's manufacturing them right now. They are people who are making significantly better ones that are hand fit. Colt has switched over for the most part to CNC machines where you have plug and play, where all these other companies are still doing all the hand fitting to give these things incredible tolerances and whatnot, and making more accurate pistols. The 1990 voluntary withdrawal from the market, I think, really hurt Colt. There are still people now who are bitter about that, who refuse to buy anything Colt after that, because they felt, again, that Colt had betrayed the commercial market. The new announcement of these rifles no longer being in production, I think, is going to be the final nail in the coffin. Not only did they, once again, I would say, let down the Second Amendment community, they also did it in a critical time right now where we have a Democratic candidate who is saying, we're going to take your guns, we're going to confiscate your rifles. This was not good timing. When you have a so-called American gun company who was supposed to be two-way friendly and support the Second Amendment, pulling out their production of the most popular rifle in the country at a time where we're having this kind of political turmoil. Once the military contracts end, I do believe that we're probably going to see the end of Colt, because unless they do something to improve their situation by developing new rifles, by developing a handgun that's capable of supplying a current law enforcement or military, they will not be able to keep their doors open unless they drastically cut down their production capacity. They sell off machines, and they just become this small mom and pop type manufacturing, unlike what they are right now, which is a major manufacturing facility. They're going to have to drastically decrease everything about the company to make the company survive with such low numbers. The whole attitude Colt's had over the last 20 years of this living in the past, that's something else that has hurt them and hurt them and hurt them. They are always bringing back. Every SHOT Show you go to, Colt's bringing back this 1911 or bringing back this cowboy gun, or we're going to sell you a retro rifle at 3 times what it costs to buy one from any other company, and they don't even manufacture it, just to put their name on it. There's no future in the past, and this company is still living in the past. Well, we've had several questions because this is a very hot topic from our Patreon, our Instagram, and Facebook. Because there is no R&D whatsoever. There's nothing new going on there. They're still working with the same technology that they have since 1995 with the M4 carbine. There is no new R&D. They have nothing to show for it. I do believe it's political. You have to understand, too, with these kind of the size of contracts, it's not like when Colt had their heyday during the early days of the global war on terror, where they had 3 shifts and they had money coming in. They don't have nearly as many people to work with. The other question that we have, too, is with these new contracts, are they going to be manufacturing all the same parts as they did previously, or are they still going to be using subcontracted parts? So there's still a lot of questions of why they're doing what they're doing. They do claim that there's a possibility of the guns coming back. We don't know. They're going to 2024, so does that mean we definitely won't see anything until at least 2024? And by that time, will they be even significant at all? People are going to want to buy them, because you can't even say anymore that this is the mil spec, this is the government contract. It's not. FN's got them. So they can't even say, well, Colt's used by the U.S. government anymore. They don't have that anymore. And especially down with the whole new weapons program coming in. I think it's a combination of cutting losses and stupidity. Oh, this ship has been sinking for 20 years. They got some reprieves, bankruptcy twice in the last 20 years. I think their real reprieve was their luck with the M4, which was designed as a weapon for rear echelon and for people who couldn't carry a rifle but needed more power than a pistol. It was pure luck on there. It was a dream for them to have it become the U.S.'s next service rifle. There was no way of knowing how successful that would be and how this would pull them out of bankruptcy. They make everybody a lot of money and not reinvest any of it back into the company and have the company stay stagnant. Because it's not mil spec. They offered models, carbine length, rifle length. Good enough for the U.S. government, good enough for you. They were never interested in manufacturing anything specifically for civilians. They wanted to keep as many parts commonality as possible with the mil spec. They did recently do it. It was specifically for the market. They did a very good job with that. That was probably the first time they gave the customers what they wanted, but it was unfortunately way too late. But Colt always stuck with what the U.S. military used. They didn't want to change nothing. That is, we don't know. I couldn't even guess because we don't know what their real intent is. Is their real intent just as they say to stop manufacturing in a saturated market? Is it truly that they're don't have the manufacturing capacity, or is it that they will in the future leave it open? But if they were going to bring the guns back, they would. Common sense tells you they would have handled this differently. They would not have come out and said that we are halting production. They would have said that we have current contracts that we're going to have to fulfill. Our capacity is going to be taken up, and as soon as that's done, we'll get back to the commercial sales. Then they wouldn't have had this whole hullabaloo where they really upset the secondhand community. That could have been handled very, very differently. So at this point, the company, there's no rhyme or reason to what they do. So wait and see. I guess if you care and you want to get Colt weapons. Because the cost. You have a combination of the cost of living, the union, and the costs of production in Connecticut. It is much less expensive to manufacture this gun in South Carolina because you don't have the unions, you don't have that high wage, you don't have those high state taxes. So the overall overhead cost is a lot less expensive with FN down in South Carolina. Colt remaining in Connecticut has been a major problem for them with making overpriced products, and unfortunately it does get to a point where your name isn't enough anymore. They want quality and they want the price. The market more than likely is oversaturated, but if you're going to see companies close down through attrition that way, it's going to be your lower-end companies, which you're not really going to mind seeing, go away. Your major manufacturers, your high-quality manufacturers are not going anywhere. And unfortunately, this industry is politically driven. Election time is going to come around where they're going to have the threats of the bans again. You're going to see these go back up in sales again. You're going to see people running to get these guns again. It's every time there's a scare politically possible of banning is when people go after it. With Trump in office, there's been not really any threat of any kind of bans or whatnot. So people have been calm and they haven't really been overbuying. Where, unlike the Obama administration, where you had on a regular basis, you would have these large ups in sales because of these threats. The election is going to make a difference as well. If we get a Democrat in office, you will see those numbers go up because there is a fear of a ban. If Trump gets in office again and things stay status quo, I think that it will be more milder sales, but it's politically driven. This is my perspective on what's going on. Again, I feel that there's a lot more to it than just what happened last week. For as far as there's a history of things leading up to where we're at right now with Colt as a company and Colt's commitment to the Second Amendment community versus just government contracts. There's really a history and there's a past that goes into what all this is. That's just why I decided to go from the beginning of when a lot of this stuff started. What the future lies for Colt, the future is very, very gloomy. As I said, without modernization, you don't see how they can continue. Everything they're going to be getting is a Band-Aid. It's going to slightly put things off. But eventually, when the M4 is replaced and it's not the weapon of choice of the U.S. military anymore, they have nothing to sell. That's going to be the problem for as far as military and law enforcement sales. And from commercial, you just won't make it on the 1911s and the Model Ps anymore, and revolvers. There's just not enough of a demand anymore for those. Back when they were manufacturing those revolvers, law enforcement, for the most part, was still using revolvers. When all those beautiful revolvers were made, that was still law enforcement. It was still a viable law enforcement weapon. When you have nothing in your inventory, period, it's a viable law enforcement weapon. That's not going to keep a major manufacturer open. Nobody out there wishes Colt to succeed more than I do. I've been their biggest fan my whole life. That's why I wanted to go to work for them. Being on the inside and seeing how things work and how decisions are made and what the logic is or lack thereof a lot of times, I don't have a lot of confidence that this company is going to prevail and going to be here with us in the future. I hope you all like this video. If you do, please click like, please subscribe, and even better, share. Thank you.